Good evening from the Sea of Galilee. I'm right by the Sea of Galilee right now. I know it's about noon in America. I know it's in the middle of the night in Asia, but we just finished watching John Kerry's speech, his vision for peace in the Middle East. I'm very surprised that John Kerry will put together an hour-long speech about the Middle East and his prospect for peace in the Middle East, and will deliver that speech 2 weeks, 3 weeks before he's actually leaving office. The Obama administration had 8 years to justify a Nobel Peace Prize that Obama received without even knowing why, without even understanding why. I don't think anyone understood why he got it. I don't think he himself understood that. But for 8 years, he realized that the Middle East is different than what he had thought. The Obama administration, by all means, everyone in the Middle East understand that he did almost every possible mistake in their foreign policy when it comes to the Middle East. All the way from choosing the wrong person or leaning on the wrong person in Egypt, Mohammed Morsi, which thank God was removed, to what happened in Libya and what happened in Syria, and of course other regions. But when it comes to Israel, we have to remember that the State Department has always been against Israeli settlements anywhere in the West Bank. But for the most part, everyone respected the fact that Israel is back in Jerusalem, Old City, and this is obviously something you cannot deny, that we're back in our homeland. This is the historical capital of the Jewish people, 3,000 years old, way before Islam was even a thought in somebody's mind. Not to mention that Jerusalem not even mentioned in the Quran even once, not to mention that that city has, I guess, millions of archaeological artifacts that contributes to the understanding that this is, and it was, a Jewish place. In fact, I'm wearing on my necklace a coin. This coin is basically from 135 AD, and this coin says to the freedom of Jerusalem. It is when Jewish people had a great revolt against the Romans, and even then in the 2nd century they were hoping that their fight is for the freedom of Jerusalem. They did not live to see Jerusalem free and Jerusalem once again a capital of the Jewish people. But I was born in 1972 in Jerusalem as a free city in the capital of Israel. Now, what is it that it's so important to understand in John Kerry's speech and of course in the resolution that was voted for and was accepted at the United Nations Security Council? First of all, you have to understand, before we move to the content, let's talk about the behind the scenes. First of all, America yesterday, when I'm saying America, I beg your pardon. It's not the Christians in America, it's not the Bible believing in America, it's not, I'm talking about the administration, okay? So when we talk about America, it's the administration. The administration first denied any connection with the UN resolution, saying that it wasn't them and all of that. And then came the understanding that it all leaked out. Apparently an Egyptian newspaper not only leaked the fact that in the middle of December, just 2 weeks ago, the Palestinian delegation met with John Kerry and with other people in the Security Council over there in America, and basically they drafted together a resolution. And the Egyptian newspaper, which is the formal mouth of President Assisi, basically gives the entire protocol of that meeting. And then the White House released a confession that yes, they were part of those who drafted the resolution. So it started with a complete lie that they had nothing to do with it, and it moved to, well, yes, we did have something to do with it. What they don't say is that not only that they put it all together, but they also pushed all the other countries not to even think about abstaining, but it has to be a yes. Now, and the reason why I'm saying that is because John Kerry was talking about how friends Israel and America are, and how the Obama administration has been the friendliest and the most supportive administration in history. Let me explain to you something. Friends don't cook behind the back of their friends some shameful thing like that. If you have something to tell me, just talk to me. If you want to put something for a vote, at least tell me about it. But what they did is cook the whole thing behind our back, and we knew about it, but there was really nothing we could have done, because we did not know until the last minute if America is going to abstain or to veto that. That was a last-minute call of President Obama, and this is why we couldn't do much about it until the actual vote itself. And the minute the vote took place and Israel was thrown under the bus, that's when I think all the rules of diplomacy were broken. And you could see that by the way not only the Americans thought, but even by the way the Prime Minister of Israel replied, and the ambassador of Israel to the United States basically said, we know that the Obama administration actually orchestrated this whole thing. Now, we would have never said that had America at least consulted with us about it, if we are counted as friends. Now, let's now talk about the actual content of the declaration following that vote. Basically, what John Kerry said just an hour ago is the following thing. First, he said, we are calling for a two-state solution. And the solution is this: Israel, a Jewish state, and Palestine, an Arab state. Well, all of that is fine, but let me tell you that this entire solution of two states was already offered in 1947 by the UN, and it was rejected by the Arabs and accepted by the Jews. You probably never heard of that. But November 29, 1947, Israel, well, not yet Israel, the Jewish people accepted a resolution that would leave Jerusalem out of our hands, leave so much of Galilee out of our hand, not to mention Judea and Samaria that were not even part of anything that we had at that time. And yet we said yay, and the Arabs said nay. So to begin with, the two-state solution that is now being offered was already on the table in 1947, and it was the Arabs who rejected it, because they said either we get everything or nothing. Up until today, their flag of the Palestinians is not just the West Bank or Gaza. Their flags, their emblems, the entire teachings, their textbooks, it's all the entire map of Israel, just so we know. Now, the second thing that Kerry was offering today was, let's go back to the 1967 borders with some exchange of some land, because there's some areas Israel won't be able to give back to Palestinians, just like several, big cities. Well, let me tell you something. How can you give back something to someone who never had it, who never owned it? You can only call an area occupied when you occupy it from someone. The Palestinians never had a state. We never took land from them. We had a war, and we took it in 1967, but that area was under Jordanian control, and it was while we fought Jordan, and not that we took it from the Palestinians. The Jordanians took it from the British, who took it from the Turks. So we didn't take anything from the Palestinians. If anything, we took back what belonged to us for thousands of years. However, let's move to the fourth one, which is Jerusalem is going to be the capital of both Palestinian and Israelis. Now, the Arabs demand the entire old city. We say, no way, we will never give up the Wailing Wall, we will never give up the old city, the Jewish quarter of the old city. And so we have a problem there. Now comes the bottom line. The bottom line is this. You know, we can agree about many things. But I believe that when it comes to Jerusalem, there's not even a single Israeli who's going to tolerate his capital being divided. So John Kerry said, Jerusalem will not be redivided, it will just be the capital of the two people. Now, how do you make one city capital of two different states without dividing it at some point, somewhere? Where will you put Israeli police? Where will you put Palestinian police? How can you put the Israeli police with guns and the Palestinians without guns? So we understand this. The whole speech is really bizarre, and it's based on either illusion. I'm not sure if they take drugs there, or I'm not sure what it is, but I just don't get it. How can someone, and I consider John Kerry as an intelligent person, how can someone say on one hand it will be a capital for both states, but it will not be re-divided? I mean, this is an oxymoron. And let me explain another thing. The Palestinians are against the definition of Israel as a Jewish state. They say Palestine will be an Arab state, Israel will not be a Jewish state, simply because there are some Arabs that lives in Israel, so we cannot define it as a Jewish state. So on one hand, they want one state clean of Jews, and they want our state with Arabs, and their state will be completely Arab, ours will be mixed, and it won't be called Jewish. What I'm trying to say here is this. This whole speech smells bad. A, the timing of it. B, the content of it. And C, the spirit of it. All of that leads me to two scriptures that we have in the Bible. One is, of course, the undeniable fact that no one but Israel has heritage and right over Jerusalem. And I'm talking about what, and we mentioned that before when we talked about the UNESCO resolution, but I'm definitely talking about the story when Nehemiah came back to the land of Israel. He was sent by the king, if you remember. And of course, you know, the people looked at him and watch what he said. You know, when he was on his way to Jerusalem, several people saw him. And I'm reading from Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 19 and on. And it says like that. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard that he's on his way to Jerusalem, look what happened. They said, "What is the thing that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" Watch this. The return of Nehemiah already back to his homeland was interpreted by the world even then as sort of a rebellion. Just like today, when the return of the Jews back to their homeland, the ancestral homeland, is interpreted by the world as a rebellion. And a secretary of the biggest superpower of the world can dedicate a an hour-long speech describing our building of homes, and almost, by the way, almost making it symmetrical to terrorism. He says, you are building houses, they are operating terrorism. How can you even compare building houses with blowing up buses and killing people and stabbing people? And that's what he said. That's what he did. And the funny thing, he talked for 3 seconds about the terrorism and for 45 minutes about those houses. So on one hand, he says this is the same. On the other hand, he concentrates only on the houses rather than the terrorism. Now watch this. And then, of course, look what he says. So, are you rebelling against the king? And so Nehemiah says, so I answer them. Bear in mind, he's answering the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Horonites. And he says, the God of heaven will give us success. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. Watch this. Nehemiah is not saying we will arise and fight. Nehemiah is not saying we will arise and defend ourselves. No, he says we will arise and build. That's what I'm trying to tell the whole world right now. We will not engage in war here. We're not going to try to defend anything that is ours anyway. We will just build. You know, this is a God-given decree for us to return back to our land and to build. And it's funny that it's not the terrorism that is occupying the minds of Secretary Kerry. It's actually the building. Watch this. And then he said to them, not only that we will build, and then he said to the Arabs and the Horonites and the Ammonites, but you have no portion, you have no right or no memorial in Jerusalem. You have no biblical ground. You have no religious ground. You have no physical right over Jerusalem. No portion physically, no right legally, and no memorial spiritually in Jerusalem. And I can tell you right now the exact same words. I'm telling the Palestinians right now, you have no right legally, you have no portion physically, and you have no. I'm sorry, but we got cut off by Facebook. I'm not sure what it was. I just quoted from Nehemiah, and we talked about that, but then I said, yes, the reality now is different than his time, because now the nations of the world, it's not just 3 people. The nations of the world aren't ready, aren't letting Israel keep Jerusalem. And it's interesting because as I said, Bible prophecy is definitely talking about this whole thing. Jerusalem has to be a problem to the whole world. And that, of course, brings me to Zechariah chapter 12, that says, the burden of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Thus declares the Lord, who stretches out the heavens, lays the foundations of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Isn't that interesting? How we have a great description of God here, not just the God of Israel. He's the one who lays the foundation of the earth. He's not going to be mocked. He's not going to be played around. He's not going to be ridiculed. And he's the one who lays the foundations of the earth, and he forms the spirit of man within him. Isn't it interesting how Zechariah is introducing God in that super important prophecy? And then he says, behold, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all the peoples around, and when the siege is against Jerusalem, it will also be against Judah. It will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. Watch this. The Paris Peace Conference on January 15 is going to take Kerry's speech, and they're going to discuss it. And I'm not going to be surprised if one of the countries will be persuaded by America to present the foundations or the layout of that speech and what is going to be in the Paris peace talks as a Security Council resolution. And watch this. It talks about all the countries of the world dealing with Jerusalem. Think about it. Damascus is in flames. Aleppo is falling apart. Mosul is falling apart. You know, you're talking about country. We're talking about Syria alone. In Syria alone, in the last 5 years, 500,000 people were butchered. And the world cannot find solution to any of those places, yet all that they care about, all that they are obsessed with is Jerusalem. It's the Israeli-Palestinian thing. And it's interesting because it's more so American, European-led effort than Arab. You know, the Sunni Arab world is bleeding right now, and there's so much going on right now that the Palestinian thing is not really high on their list of concerns right now. The Shiite expansion and the fact that Israel is actually the only friend they can rely on in this whole thing against Iran, all that to say that we see an effort on behalf of America and Europe to spearhead some sort of an agenda that will help dividing Jerusalem. And watch this. The Bible says that the Lord knows that. The Lord is not going to cause them to deal with Jerusalem, but the Lord is going to cause them to be injured by this whole thing. There's no other city on planet Earth that God said, this is my place where I'm going to put my name. There's only one place, and that's Jerusalem. And the world is trying to take Jerusalem from its rightful owners or divide it between people that are not really the rightful owners. And watch this. He says, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. Isn't that interesting that they're going to gather in Paris next month? And eventually, physically, they will be gathered in Jerusalem. The Bible talks about the fact that, you know, both in chapter 12 and chapter 14 of Zechariah, in chapter 14, Zechariah says, behold, the day is coming for the Lord when the spoil taken from you will be divided among you. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured. God is going to allow them to fulfill their heart desires, and that's what he does many times. But then they will be stumbled, they will fall, and they will be defeated. Now, who is going to defeat them? That's an interesting thing. The Bible says that the one who is going to fight them is not the army of Israel. It's not the F-35s, and it's not the Merkava, the chariot tanks. And the Bible says that in verse 3, it says the following thing. It says, then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. In that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. So, the diplomatic effort to divide Jerusalem and the ganging of all those nations against us right now is still in the diplomatic realm. But eventually, after after all these things, I believe that it has to happen after the rapture, by the way, just so you know, because when Jesus returns with his feet standing on Mount of Olives, this is what we consider the second coming of Christ. And the Bible talks about the fact that when he comes with his saints. On the same chapter, he says in verse 5, it says at the end of verse 5, it says, "Then the Lord my God will come and all the holy ones with him." We will return with Jesus to Jerusalem to put an end to the war that eventually will be instigated by the nations of the world that will be so obsessed with Jerusalem. But my point is very clear. Jerusalem is so dear to God that he's going to personally come and personally defeat them because of all of that. So right now we live in the time where everything is on the declarative realm. It's all declaration. The Kerry's speech, and then the vote in the UN, and it's going to be the Paris Peace Conference, and maybe Trump will move the embassy to Jerusalem. It's all on the declaration realm and level. But the point, at some point, Jerusalem will be even a much greater problem to the whole world, where they will physically come against it, and the Lord himself will come back. That will be the timing for Jesus to return and for us to return with him. And then, of course, Jerusalem will be liberated forever, because Jesus is going to establish the millennial kingdom in Jerusalem, in this Jerusalem, by the way, for 1,000 years. This Jerusalem will look different when Jesus comes back, because if you read Zechariah 14, there will be a great river that will come. Half of it will go down to the Mediterranean, and the other half will go down to the Dead Sea, and living water will start flowing all the way to both sides, and a river in the midst of the city will be created. Interesting, beautiful, yet we live in amazing times. That which will happen in Zechariah 14 after the rapture is being prepared right now in the minds and the hearts of the leaders of the world before the rapture. And all of that to tell us that the rapture is so near and it's so close. And this is going to be the theme of 2017 as far as I'm concerned.